Um, and so let's go ahead and get started. So you know what day it is? It's Transformation Thursdays, where we offer free virtual programming that's holistic, culturally relevant, and focused on various business topics for entrepreneurs at all levels of business to meet women where they're at. And so today we have the honor of welcoming Janice Lucero, owner of Zephyr Technologies, to lead us in some Cybersecurity 101 teachings. But before we get into that, I'm going to go ahead and share the agenda and some little bit of grounding information. So we're going through the introduction pieces now. We'll share a little bit more about what you can expect for today's gathering. We'll have some time for Q&A. And then at the end, we'll go ahead and share some upcoming events, resources, and gratitude before we leave today. And before we get started, we like to ground our online events in these community agreements, just to give ourselves some space and grace as we continue to learn together. So with that, our community agreements are that NWL is committed to the understanding of the inherent value of the women in our community to learn and celebrate mistakes. We are committed to radical transparency, understanding that we will work to heal each other and our communities and the decisions we make. We believe in thinking critically about our work and its impact on our Earth Mother and our peoples. We strive toward greater inclusion of our relatives who possess differing abilities and come from different backgrounds. And we believe that our work must be intentional and utilize anti-racist frameworks to ensure we keep moving forward with social and economic justice in mind. And oh, here we go. And so that brings us to today's focus on Cybersecurity 101, building a strong digital foundation, featuring my sister, Janice Lucero. She is the owner and founder of Zephyr Technologies, bringing 20 plus years of IT and cybersecurity experience across government, military, and tribal sectors. She specializes in SCADA systems, NERC, CIP compliance, and securing critical infrastructure through innovative IT and OT solutions. Zephyr Technologies is a Native women-led company that provides IT, cybersecurity awareness, and education to small businesses, nonprofit organizations, tribal and enterprise partners. Janice has supported critical infrastructure and energy systems with a focus on these compliances, systems hardening, and secure integration of the OT and IT environments. And so with that, please join me with welcoming Janice to our space. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to take us from here. Harkem, Janice.
Makuam. Hello, everybody. I'm Janice Lucero. Harkem, Jan, for that really awesome introduction. Really happy to be here. I hope you guys are comfortable. You have it's fall. I love that we're like in this fall season now. So I hope you have your fall drinks with you, your lattes, coffee, your teas. I have warm water. So that's what I'm drinking today. Thank you so much for spending your lunchtime with me. I am going to share my screen so that you can view my presentation here. So give me a minute. I'm going to go here and presentation. Okay. Give me a minute here. Thank you all. It's good to hear from you all from the chat. Some of you all coming from Washington, Arizona. So that's really awesome. Excuse me. Okay, I need to go back here. I had it working. Okay. Now I gotta go back and share. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
But we
perfect.
can see the slides also in the left pane,
Okay.
but now we can just see the whole full
Oh,
slide. So
perfect. Oops.
looks
Okay,
good.
awesome. Well, again, welcome. This is Cybersecurity 101, building a strong digital foundation. As you know, technology is huge right now. You know, we use it for everything. I had a really, Jen, thank you so much. Jen's one of my sisters. I'm from the Pueblo of Isleta, also known as Dahipaf. That's my Tiwa name. I am the owner and founder of Zephyr Technologies. We're a very new company, although I do have 20 years of experience in IT in different sectors. I worked in, for Department of Defense. I also left the utility industry back in 2021. I was running a business unit in operation technology, and I was in these substations, as you see that picture in the middle. Um, so it was an interesting time there because I was the only woman in this field. So at the substations, I was the only one only woman showing up, and I'd be surrounded by, men who were working on different things in a substation. And so I really got to gain a lot of experience hardening and compliance work really in that industry. So I bring that um, now to where I'm at and opening up Zephyr Technologies. And really the reason and the why is because I really do believe in a strong foundation to education and awareness. So this is the whole purpose of this presentation as well. So today's overview is, really going into like, what is cybersecurity, the types of threats that are out there, common attacks, examples. I think we all probably have an example to share with cybersecurity. I think we've all been a victim in some way, whether that's a scam, anything really, identity theft. I know I've been a victim to that. So, talking about some of those examples, the laws and regulations and guidelines that are being followed for small businesses. I know all of us have a little bit of a different background, but again, it really does pertain to technology in general, any kind of online devices, assets that hook up to the internet. Confidentiality and integrity, availability, safeguarding sensitive information for those of us who work with PII. How do we go about those areas to protect that information? Passwords and multi-factor authentication, email phishing. We've seen a lot of those, and I've been a victim to that as well. Device updates. I have updates. Too many A's, but device updates. Why that's important. Um, Cloud safety. I know some of us no longer back up like before you could back up on your like on a USB drive, but those are also important cybersecurity resources that we'll be sharing out. And conclusion, I also wanted to share at the end of this a how-to, like going into your settings. Most of us probably utilize a Gmail account, or our organizations utilize the Google Workspace. So I'll have a session after this presentation to show you some features in there that you can utilize. So thank you again. Introduction to cybersecurity. Like I mentioned, it's really, um, the practice of protecting any device that's on the network, your phone, your laptops, your SCADAs. When I talk about SCADAs, that's devices in a substation that are they're just used for one thing, and that one thing might just be communicating with something out of the net or its private network. So anything really that's on the network that needs to be hardened. So, right, the importance of it is making sure that our information is being protected. We have a lot of things that we do online, banking, our bills are online. I'm sure, when we look at certain things, our retirement, we're looking at those kinds of financials on our computers. So how do we protect those things? Those are really important to us. We work really hard. Understanding common cyber threats, right? What's out there right now? I think one of the scary things as we move along in this presentation, but one of the scary things recently here in my pueblo was we were having folks going door to door saying they worked with P&M and they were this solar company, but um, they were asking for credit card information. My dad was one. So again, how do we bring that awareness and education? And some of those threats that I just mentioned they're being creative right now. But as you see, you know, and you read about these threats being on the news, whether that's, hitting a small person like us, who are just doing, working on our computers, maybe we don't have a full network, we're seeing malware. And malware, it comes in, different ways of viruses and worms and ransomware that could be through an email. So again, phishing, right? Phishing attacks, people will send you these crazy emails and there might be a link or something. Social engineering, sometimes we don't think about, that's a big one too, because we're sharing so much information. We're human, so we're talking, we may be like, oh yeah, hey, I left my password under my keyboard and go ahead and utilize that or use that for the day. But then let's say you shared it with so and so, right? Or they hear you, maybe they heard your conversation, you're talking to somebody and they take your password. Denial of service, that's just somebody sitting behind a computer and they're just pinging. They're pinging, pinging your IP. So everybody has like an identifier when you're hooked up to the computer. So it's like it's called a MAC address. And so that's how they'll also, there's just different ways, but they can find an IP address and they can start pinging you. Hacking, right? People who just, like I said, sit around and they'll have like fobbers without you're not even knowing. People who are still utilizing maybe keyboards, they could put those in. Um, they have sniffers. Sniffers are like where you sniff out the network to see if maybe there's any vulnerabilities to people who don't have a password. Or again, right, the common 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 2 routers. So those are those are the cyber threats that we're seeing today. And also like I mentioned, the people who are coming and saying they work for a certain company, but they're not. So those are, these are really things that we need to look out for. And how do we do that? How do we look out for these kinds of threats? They're everyday threats, especially to us as hardworking moms, as professionals, even in our own in our organizations and companies. So again, right, just going based off of the attacks that I talked about, phishing attacks seem to be really, really big. Ransomware, people who they encrypt these files and they demand for payment. I know our tribe here in Isleta Pueblo, we were a victim, I want to say a couple years ago, maybe it's been about 8 years now. And they did have to pay a ransom fee for their information. But again, all of this is a learning opportunity. How can we protect ourselves? Data breaches, people who have access to information that don't really need that information. The man in the middle, those attacks are, again, I talked about, communication. It could be somebody who is listening in. Maybe they have a sniffer. And those are just devices on the network that how they gain information from watching, data through the network. They're watching it. So it's kind of scary that, you're like, what the heck? People are really interested in doing that stuff, but they are because they find it to have some value. And that's why these attacks have been, so they have been big. They've been big to our industries. They have been big, especially to utilities. So, just again, protecting yourself in a way that you feel safe, because I think that's the main thing, is having that peace of mind. So some of these, here's a statistic here. 2023, this was a couple years ago. Cybersecurity Ventures report cyber attacks are expected to cost the world 10.5 trillion. That's a lot. That's by this year. So that's a lot of money that we're putting into our systems. We're protecting ourselves. That people are, like I said, really trying to get data from us and really trying to steal information because it does hold value. And I wanted to share like some examples, um, that real world examples that have happened. So in 2027, there was a ransom attack that affected over 200,000 computers in 150 countries. And so again, when you think about these attacks and you think about, what's going on even locally, even, I mean, again, just on our phones, are people calling and they're like, "Hey, I think the most recent one was where there was it was asking for like a toll fee. I don't know if anybody got that, but I got a toll fee like, hey, you owe this much for this toll." And I'm like, what? That I was like, no. So I delete it. But again, if we don't know, we're gonna be like, what didn't, what is that? And so we're curious. And so, we'll click on things that maybe we shouldn't, but just be diligent in your own um just with your information that you have on hand. Be really diligent. Do you know that person? So some of these attacks are because software updates were not being applied. So again, right here, Windows operating systems encrypted files. They were demanding ransom payments, but again, all of this was because software updates. So when we're not updating our information, or not, I'm sorry, not information, we're not updating our devices to be current. I mentioned I worked in the utility industry, and I saw devices on the floor that, when I say on the floor, like they're just standing standalone devices, but they weren't updated. They had an old system, and they were afraid because if that system broke, then everything would break and it wouldn't work. So there was a lots of planning to work around those things, but these are some of the things that, when we think about, well, wow, I could have prevented that if I would have just did this update. We have the Apple phones, and we have the system updates, and sometimes it's annoying because you're like, another update, right? And it takes storage, and it takes some of you got to wait because it takes time. So for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's going to take, another 2 gigs of my storage that maybe I need to have to delete an app. But right, it's us really knowing, what do we have on our computers, what apps do we have, what are our devices, what are we protecting. Identity theft seems to be a really, really big one. I have been a victim to identity theft, and I hope that you guys never experience this, because this was a really huge impact on my credit. It was a huge impact, of course, on just getting my banking account stuff situated. Also with your Social Security, if they use that. So this is a big one that I felt that was like huge when it came to how can I protect myself. Um, from somebody taking my information and utilizing, my credit cards and my social security number. So that's, and again, how do we even report this? Who do you report this to? So this slide here just shows the breaches that have occurred. 2025, just recent, 50 million students affected, and that was including their social security numbers, medical records. And that's pretty scary because now somebody has, again, right, they have that vulnerable information that you're supposed to protect, or somebody else is supposed to protect. That's part of that law, that PII, the HIPAA law as well. So there's there's ways that we can protect ourselves. And it's just really being diligent, like I said, knowing, what do you have that multi-factor authentication set up. And we'll get into that in the next couple of slides, but I just wanted to show you the numbers here, that it's a lot of people who are being affected and impacted by hackers. I talked about the laws and regulations and guidelines. These are some of the laws that are in place and regulations and guidelines that are in place. There's CISA, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. This helps businesses and government agencies share their cyber threats between one another, so there's more awareness. Um, FISMA, which is the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. This is also a federal guideline that helps them secure their information. And so there's these really awesome guidelines as we start to grow in our industry, as we start to grow in business. If you're working with, you know, federal contracts, there's guidelines there. I talked about HIPAA, the HIPAA Act. That's something that definitely protects us. I believe during COVID, right? Most of us have had to experience, that COVID era and getting COVID and all of that. And the thing that really was scary was, when I was at the clinic here in Isleta, um, it was if somebody had COVID, I overheard people say and calling other people, "Hey, did you know so and so had COVID?" I was just like, "Wow, that's pretty crazy. Where's the HIPAA Act in that?" Because that's information that should not be shared. So, knowing these kinds of laws too helps you protect yourself and your information from not being exploited. Nobody wanted that. Nobody wants to, share their personal information like that. That's something that, um, we definitely need to take that extra step. The NIST standards are just really a long list of standards to help organizations and businesses um, reduce their cybersecurity risks. And so there's some really great structure to that. They use a lot of, I think it's called NIST 8002.1, I believe. I could be wrong. It's been a while and I apologize for that, but I can look that up and provide that later. But this NIST is it's really useful again for people who are, who are creating, who are innovative. They're creating things and they need a guideline to help them along the way. These are the three pillars that we use as well in IT and cybersecurity: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So these pillars help us protect the information that we're dealing with, right? So these are kind of like the values that we stand on when it comes to dealing with data. So confidentiality ensures that sensitive information is only accessible by authorized individuals, meaning that if you're not part of that group, or you don't, let's say finance, and you need to see, statements, but you have access to something else that you don't really need, right? That's that confidentiality. How are we protecting that? Integrity ensures that the data is accurate, complete, and unaltered. So how you see the data is how you're going to get the data, that there's no altercations to it. Availability ensures that the data and the systems are accessible when needed by authorized users. So if you're going to that folder and you're downloading that folder that has, some information that you need on it and it's not available, that can be an impact. It could be an impact to your work, to the org, because now there's a little bit of a compromise. So these are the pillars that we stand off on, or that we lean on to help us protect data. And so going into passwords, I love this topic because I think we're all I think we're all at fault sometimes, right? When it comes to trying to set a password up real quick because you need to get into an app, or you downloaded something and you're like, okay, password 12345, right? I'm a victim to that. And I will say I have done that a few times, but I will go back and I will make sure that I, create a password that I can remember. I think that's our problem too. Sometimes there's so many passwords that we don't remember. But I've gotten better, and I hope you've gotten better with that too. So to be honest, I like to use catchphrases when it comes to passwords, such as love me do, right? Something of that sort. So I like to use stuff like that. People get really creative. You can also use a password manager that will help you, or the complex passwords that will help you, implement, special characters and numbers and letters, so symbols. So that's I don't, whatever you guys feel safe with, as long as you know your password, you know where you put your password, you can remember your password, and nobody has access to your password. Um, I think that's totally fine. And don't, just try not to use the passwords, like I said, that are really easy, right? I mean, welcome is used to be really popular, but password 12345 seems to be the number one. Using multi-factor authentication, what that is really is it's just adding that extra layer of security. So for instance, if you go to the bank and they may ask you for a code word, um, that's that's also adding another layer of security. For instance, if you have an app that you get into and that app requires a code, and you need to input that code, that's also considered multi-factor authentication. You can also put that onto your Google account or your accounts that you're using for any kind of password. So that's always an option, and I really do encourage that. Access control. This one is, you see this in your organization, you see this in your business. You see this really everywhere. There's, access control even when it comes to physical access. Who needs access to your house? Kind of think of it like that, right? Who needs access to come into your house? I'm sure you don't give a key or your code to everybody. So think of it like this, right? So access control, who are those authorized people? Who are the people that need, to just use the restroom? Let's say you're on a job site and you're like, well, they don't really need to get into the shed, but they need to get into the restroom, and that restroom has a code. Okay, well, those workers, actually everybody would need that code, right? They all need a code to get in, but maybe certain people need access to get into a certain area. And so this is really where we start to look at, who's, if especially if you're a business, who handles what? How are you structured? How is finance different from I don't know, let's just say from what's another organization? IT, right? IT and finance. We're not going to need the same information. IT might need more permissions, and finance might need, you know, not as many permissions. So looking at your structure helps, but also again, looking at, if you're sharing a document, if you're sharing a Google document, like I said, I know we use Google a lot. And if you're sharing a Google document or a folder, does that person really need that? Do they need editor? Do they need a viewership? So if you start to really look at what kind of access is needed, that'll definitely help you, with somebody maybe not even, somebody not taking information or misusing that information, or when somebody leaves, those kinds of things. So think about how you're structured. Um, I love, like I said, I love using the house analogy, right? Who needs to get in your house? You don't want so and so getting through your window. I have boys. I have two boys, and my youngest is 19, and I would be like, who the heck's coming through your window? How come they didn't come through the front door, right? So again, we're moms. We're gonna be, wondering who's coming in and out. And it's the same thing with, who's accessing your folder, who's accessing, that drive, who has access to that room. So it just helps you control um, the authorization. So you want to start off with the least privileges. Maybe you just give them permission to log into your computer with their own account, and they only have access to one folder. So, again, just looking at the structure and what's needed. Email phishing. I know this is a big one for a lot of us. I hope that, this has been something that you're made aware of or you have some education on, because I think this is what really catches a lot of us. Sometimes we're in a hurry. Um, we're looking at email coming in. You know, how many of us have like 50 emails a day in our inbox? We kind of have a lot, right? So we have to swift through it, and whatever needs to be deleted. But sometimes we have that one for whatever reason that is, and it catches our eye, and we're like, oh wait, what is this? And so when we start looking into that email and it says, oh my gosh, and it says maybe you owe something, or your account needs update, whatever that might be very diligent on what you're looking at. Look at some of these um, red flags that you see here, right? Security bank. So it's is that legit? Is that a legit email account? Um, it's saying spelling and mistakes. You know, if it's coming from your bank, call them directly. If it's something that you ordered from Amazon, how many of us make Amazon purchases every day? I do. Well, I try not to, but sometimes I do. Um, and if I get like, sometimes it asks you, do a review, and I'm like, okay, I'll look at the email and I'll make sure like, yes, this is legit. And if not, I delete it. Don't be afraid to delete your things that you're not really familiar with, your email that you're not familiar with, because it's better to be safe than to be sorry. And if your email, sometimes if you download it and it comes in an attachment, if you have an antivirus, it scans it. So it'll scan the document and it'll flag it or it won't, right? So those are some things to also look out for if you have a antivirus installed on your laptop. Solutions to safeguard information. We talked about a little bit of these encryption tools. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with that, but BitLocker, that's a local one on your laptop. FileVault, that's a Mac OS. That's actually in your settings. VeraCrypt is another one that can be downloaded. It's an application. And so these definitely do help. We used to, when I worked at the utility company, BitLocker was one of them that we utilized a lot. And so we'd have these, they were called transitional laptops, excuse me. And so what would happen is if a relay guy or somebody in a different field came and they wanted to use that laptop, and let's say it was in a substation, they had to undock it and they'd have to call, or they would have to already have that BitLocker code, and they would type that in and it would let them into the computer. If not, it completely locks you out and you need that code. It'll keep popping up and asking for a code. Password management tools, Password Manager, which is on Google, and I'll show you here shortly. LastPass, I've never used that. I've used iPassword. Dashlane is a new one for me, but these are just apps that you can download. Like I said, Password Manager is part of Google, and I'll show you that here in a bit. We talked about multi-factor authentication. We just covered antiviruses and anti-malware softwares. So I like to use one of the free antivirus that I like to use is AVG. I've used that for a long time, and it's done a really great job. It's free. It scans your system, but it also does protect you. And if you haven't already turned on your firewall on your laptops, your Mac OS or your Windows, do that. That's just another way to protect your computer. VPNs. VPNs are virtual private networks, and so you can set one of those up if you know how. That's just a safe way. It's just a tunnel basically that you'd connect to. It's another remote connection, a safer way. Solutions to prevent email phishing. Um, Verify the sender, like I said. Avoid clicking on links. That's going to be helpful. Talked about phishing software, anti-phishing software, and educate yourself and employees. If you're not familiar with phishing, There's a bunch of YouTube videos on it and things to help you become aware of it. But you know, it's just really taking that step to educate yourself and the awarenesses that are there. Updates on laptops, mobile devices, and computers. I mentioned that attack earlier. The ransom attack on the Microsoft OSs, and that was like I mentioned because the updates weren't regular on their computers. So if you have, I know it takes time. I know, you know, it'll take at least 20-30 minutes for your laptop to update, but it's sometimes, like now, right, we're using Zoom, and I don't know about you all, but there's times where I've logged into Zoom and it's like, oh, update, and I'm like, okay, great, right? So there's like 20 minutes that go by. I'm sorry, even applications such as Zoom can there can also be a threat to that. So sharing that Zoom link, if you share that out too early, people who don't need that access or don't have the intention to really show up for that workshop or meeting or whatever it is that you're doing online, and their whole intention is to create chaos, don't share that right away. Let them register like you did today. Register and have them send that link to you at the end. I've had a couple of stories, and actually I've had a compromise where we've had a lady in the past. I was doing a Zoom call like this, and she compromised our meeting in a way, not to where a lot of our the audience, was to see that, but it was kind of more undercover stuff that she did. And it's a learning opportunity. Really, that's all that is, right? It's a learning opportunity. So those are some things that I like to share with Zoom because we've had some issues. Security patches, Patch Tuesday is what we used to call it when I used to work in IT. We did all of our patches on Tuesday. So Microsoft, if you're using a Microsoft OS operating system, or if you're using Mac, they have, you'll see it through the settings, security update or update. It'll say, apply those if you can. Performance enhancements, anything with the BIOS on your computer, update those. My computer, for whatever reason, was shutting down. Like it would shut down and then it would take forever to come up. And I had to do a little bit of research, but what it was my BIOS. I had to fix a setting in my BIOS, and I also had to update it. So once I did those things, it's been fine. And sometimes, again, right, it's just like, why is this doing that? And it could be frustrating because you're like, it was working just yesterday. um, and I've had those issues, where you're scratching your head and you're like, what the heck? But it takes a little bit of time, and you'll get it. A lot of this is just empowering you all and ourselves to overcome that hurdle sometimes of cyber issues or these kinds of issues, because they can be a little bit they can be scary, but they can also be time consuming. If you use a cloud, I use OneDrive, and so again, right, technology has changed so much from 20 years ago, from when I first started. We used to do backups on tapes. We used to do backups on, your little USB drives. You could do a backup on locally on your computer. And so nowadays, our hard drives, yes, a lot of them are really expensive and sturdy, but that's like going into the thousands. But you can still back up your data with cloud. You can still back up your data with Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive. um, and it's sometimes you're going to have to pay for storage. That's the thing that sucks too, is if you reach a certain limit, or if you have a terabyte, maybe one of the storage drives, like external storage drives, you can use that. But it's important to definitely back up your information, all your data, if you can. um The cloud is great. If you have that, that's probably a paid application. I talked about some resources, and those resources here are the SIS controls, the NIST cybersecurity framework that I talked about. There's some free antivirus softwares that you can download and check out: Avast, AVG, Malwarebytes. There's the SANS Institute. They have a lot of great resources and articles on cybersecurity, and to stay safe online. Some of those practices and businesses, how to secure your online presence with your business. And again, like I said, stay vigilant, be aware of what is out there. Stuff, these kinds of workshops that are free to you, join them. You might learn, you're going to learn something here. You're going to learn something from other people. We all have our our experiences and professional, um, our professional experiences as well that we bring to the table, and be proactive, right? Be proactive. Don't wait to the end. If you haven't already installed an antivirus, do that. Do a quick scan, and seek help. If you're stuck and you're just like, hey, I don't understand this, you can reach out to myself, people who do, can help you just kind of get over the hump of certain things. Google has been my best friend sometimes, and it still is, because I'm like, I got to Google that, right? So, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that these kinds of workshops are definitely helpful for us as parents, also as business owners, and just professionals that are in the field. Um, and so, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen again, because I do have some. I want to share my screen with the Google Manager, the account manager. I want to show you some features in there, but I'm open to take some questions, I think, that I see in here. Do we have some questions? Okay. Let's
I
see.
didn't have any questions, but I was just sharing some maybe experiences that I had related to like security threats. Like I got a ticket in downtown Albuquerque and I thought it was like a legit ticket, so I paid it. But I think yeah, it was a scam, but yeah, so I would say also watch out for that too.
I'm sorry that happened. Yeah, that's always a bummer, because they look so real. And I think that's what gets us, right? Is like, it looks so real. A lot of these, we were just like, oh yeah. And we're in a hurry. We're doing things, it's life. We're moving, and sometimes we don't pay attention. But thank you for sharing that. Does anybody want to share um, maybe something that has happened? Did you get scammed, or, what did you do?
This is Larissa. I didn't get scammed, but I was one time in a Zoom, in a in-person meeting. It was hybrid, and they had a Zoom option it was an APS parent committee meeting. So, obviously assuming it's Albuquerque Public Schools, like that it's a safe system. They were using Zoom, and then like halfway through the meeting, some very inappropriate pictures came up on the screen, on the Zoom screen. And there were, parents and elders and children in the session, and the meeting facilitator was really quickly trying to figure out like how to get rid of the screen, and like it was
Oh,
just this real panic because it was a flash of different very inappropriate parts of a male's body.
oh,
And so they just freaked out. Also, the other instinct was they just shut down, they just closed the laptop, put the laptop down, because not being able to try to remedy the situation quickly enough. So yeah, I've seen Zoom hacked as well.
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, what a bummer. And it's a kind of, it's like embarrassing, because you're like, oh my gosh, everybody's on, especially when you have everybody on, and oh wow, yeah, that's a tough one. And they don't, yeah, people are in a panic. They don't know, hey, just stop the video, or they don't know what to do. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Well, I'm gonna get set up to share my
Yeah,
screen here.
before we move on, I was just wondering, with all the resources, and I guess maybe a starting place that we might check to, I guess, get started on our own cybersecurity plan. Because I guess for me, the only time really that I pay attention to like setting up firewalls or anything like that is when I get a new device, and I don't really like check up on it after that. And so I guess what would you recommend, or what starting place would you recommend? I guess just going over your own like internal defenses.
That's a really great question, and thank you so much for that. So I would start with identify. Identify your assets. That's the place to start. What do you have, whether that's a mobile device, whether that's your laptop, whether that's an iPad, whether that's even your gaming system, right? Because your Xbox, your kids, what is connected to the internet? What is connected? What is, identify your devices. Once you identify those devices, such as, well, I utilize my laptop every day. That's something that I utilize because I work on here. I use certain applications. I check my email. So my first instinct is going to be, okay, my laptop. What am I doing to protect my laptop? And what is it on my laptop that I use? What am I protecting? Am I saving my files locally? Am I saving them on my C drive? If I were to have if there was a power outage, would I be able to recover that information? Right, identify what your assets are, identify your applications that you're using. What is it that you use? Are you using your banking account that's on your phone? Are you using your Google account that's on your laptop? And is that how you're accessing information? And so if you know what you're utilizing, for instance, all of us probably have a personal email account that's not tied to a work account. And so that email account could be your Yahoo, it could be your Google, it could be your Hotmail. So what settings and what security implementations are you going to utilize and do at that point? So that's where I think it's a great segue, Jen, for me to share my screen with that. And so this is my screen. I hope that you can see it. Can you all see it?